For all of human history, two questions have stood above all others, haunting our quietest moments and fueling our greatest myths. What happens when we die? And what is this mysterious inner experience we call consciousness? These are not just philosophical puzzles, they are deeply personal inquiries that touch every one of us. We live our entire lives inside our own minds, experiencing the world through a unique, private lens. Yet, we have no real grasp on how this internal movie is generated, and when the projector of our biology finally shuts down, we are left to wonder what, if anything, comes next. It is the ultimate cliffhanger at the end of every human story. This journey into the unknown is a fundamental part of the human condition. We build monuments, write books, and create art, all in an effort to leave a trace of our conscious experience behind. We tell stories of afterlives and reincarnation, seeking comfort in the idea that the end of the body is not the end of the self. Science, in its relentless pursuit of answers, has begun to peel back the layers of this profound mystery. It approaches death not as a single terrifying event, but as a biological process, one that can be studied, understood, and perhaps one day even manipulated. It's an exploration that takes us to the very edge of what it means to be alive. The intersection of consciousness and death is where our most advanced science meets our most ancient fears. Today, on June 17, 2025, we find ourselves at a unique point in history. Our tools for peering into the brain are more powerful than ever before. We can watch as neural networks fire, as thoughts form, and as the brain's intricate machinery begins to power down. This gives us an unprecedented opportunity to ask questions that were once the exclusive domain of priests and philosophers. Can we pinpoint the moment consciousness fades? Is there a signature of its departure? These are the questions that now drive neuroscientists in labs around the world. Our exploration will take us through the labyrinth of the human brain, the strange and vivid reports of those who have stood at death's door, and the ethical tightropes of modern medicine. We will look at what it means to be brain dead and how new technologies are blurring the line between life and death. We will even venture into the speculative realms of artificial intelligence and quantum physics to ask if consciousness is strictly a biological phenomenon. This is not just a scientific inquiry, it is a quest to understand the very essence of our existence and our ultimate place in the cosmos. The answers are not all here yet, but the search itself reveals a universe more complex and wondrous than we ever imagined. Before we can understand what happens to consciousness when we die, we must first grapple with what it is. On the surface, it seems simple. It's the feeling of being you. It's the taste of chocolate, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the sting of a sad memory, and the vibrant red of a rose. It's the rich, seamless, and private movie playing inside your head from the moment you wake until you fall into a dreamless sleep. This subjective first-person experience is what philosophers call qualia, and here lies the central mystery, what has been dubbed the hard problem of consciousness. We can easily study the brain's mechanics, how neurons fire and signals travel, but why should all that physical activity feel like anything at all? Scientists have proposed several major theories to explain how the brain conjures this inner world. One leading idea is the Integrated Information Theory, or IIT. It suggests that consciousness is a product of a system's ability to integrate vast amounts of information in a complex, unified way. A system is conscious, according to IIT, if its parts are highly interconnected but also differentiated, creating a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. The human brain, with its 86 billion neurons and trillions of connections, is a masterful example of such a system. This theory implies that consciousness isn't an all-or-nothing property, but exists on a spectrum, and could potentially be found in other complex systems. Another prominent theory is the Global Workspace Theory, or GWT. This model likens consciousness to a spotlight on a theater stage. At any given moment, countless processes are happening in the dark backstage of our unconscious mind, regulating our heartbeat, processing sensory data, storing memories. But when a piece of information becomes important enough, it is broadcast to a global workspace on the main stage. This makes it available to all the other systems in the brain, and it is this moment of widespread sharing that we experience as consciousness. It's the brain's way of prioritizing and focusing its immense resources on one thing at a time. A third perspective comes from predictive processing models. These theories propose that the brain isn't a passive receiver of information from the outside world. Instead, it is a prediction machine, constantly generating a model of the world and then using sensory input to correct its predictions. What we experience as consciousness is this internally generated model, our best guess of what's out there. The outside world simply provides the error signals that help refine the simulation. This explains why our expectations can so powerfully shape our perceptions and why we can be so easily fooled by optical illusions. Each of these theories offers a piece of the puzzle, yet none fully explains the leap from electrical signals to subjective feeling. So what happens to this intricate inner world when the body begins to die? Death is not a singular moment like flipping a switch. It is a process, a cascade of biological failures that unfolds over minutes and sometimes hours. It begins when the heart stops beating, a state known as clinical death. Without the heart pumping, blood flow to the brain ceases. The brain is an incredibly greedy organ, demanding about 20% of the body's oxygen and glucose, despite being only 2% of its weight. When this supply is cut off, its functions begin to shut down in a predictable sequence. The brain doesn't just go dark. It flickers and surges before it fades. Within seconds of cardiac arrest, the brain's electrical activity changes dramatically. The familiar rhythms of waking consciousness, which we can see on an electroencephalogram or EEG, disappear. The brain enters a state of electrical silence, or what appears to be silence. However, recent studies on dying animals and a few human patients have revealed something astonishing. Just before the brain's activity flatlines completely, there is often a massive, highly synchronized burst of high-frequency electrical activity, known as a wave of gamma oscillations. This surge can be even more organized and powerful than the patterns seen during full, waking consciousness. This final surge of brain activity is a tantalizing clue. Scientists speculate that this could be the neurobiological basis for the vivid and highly realistic experiences reported by people who have been resuscitated from cardiac arrest, the so-called near-death experiences. It's as if the dying brain, in a last-ditch effort, ignites all its circuits at once. This electrical storm could trigger a flood of memories, emotions, and perceptions, creating a hyper-real internal experience as the external world fades away. It's a powerful reminder that the brain's activity doesn't simply stop, it undergoes a profound and chaotic transformation. Ultimately, without oxygen, the brain cells cannot produce the energy they need to maintain their structure and function. The delicate balance of ions inside and outside the neurons collapses, leading to a wave of chemical changes that spreads across the brain like a tsunami. This process, known as anoxic depolarization, is the point where irreversible damage begins. The cells start to break down, and the intricate architecture that supports consciousness is dismantled. The internal movie stops, the projector breaks, and the theater of the mind goes dark for good. The gradual shutdown of the brain is the biological final act of consciousness as we know it. For centuries, people who have been resuscitated from the brink of death have returned with extraordinary stories. These near-death experiences, or NDEs, often share remarkable similarities across cultures and belief systems. Common themes include a feeling of profound peace, the sensation of leaving one's physical body and observing events from above, traveling through a tunnel toward a brilliant light, and encountering deceased relatives or spiritual beings. For a long time, these accounts were dismissed as hallucinations or fantasies. But as resuscitation science has improved, more and more people are surviving clinical death, and the reports have become too numerous and consistent for science to ignore. Researchers are now trying to understand the biological underpinnings of these powerful subjective events. The out-of-body experience, for instance, might be linked to a breakdown in the brain's ability to integrate sensory information. The temporoparietal junction is a key brain region responsible for creating our sense of self and its location in space. When this area is disrupted, either by lack of oxygen or direct electrical stimulation in a lab, people can feel as though their consciousness has separated from their body. The brain's model of self becomes detached from its physical anchor, creating the compelling illusion of floating above the scene. The tunnel of light, another classic feature of NDEs, may also have a physiological explanation. As blood flow and oxygen to the retina and visual cortex decrease, peripheral vision could be the first to fail, creating a narrowing field of vision. The central part of the visual field, which is more densely packed with photoreceptors, might hold on longer, resulting in the perception of a bright light at the center of a dark tunnel. The intense feelings of peace and euphoria could be caused by the release of endogenous opioids and other neurochemicals in the brain as it responds to the extreme stress and trauma of dying. It is the brain's final, powerful dose of self-produced comfort. Despite these plausible biological explanations, some aspects of NDEs remain puzzling. One of the most debated topics is that of veridical perceptions, where individuals report observing details of their resuscitation that they could not have possibly seen or heard through normal sensory channels. For example, some have accurately described medical procedures, conversations between doctors, or the appearance of specific instruments used while they were clinically dead, with no heartbeat or measurable brain activity. These cases, though rare and difficult to verify rigorously, challenge our current understanding and keep the door open to the possibility that consciousness may not be entirely confined to the brain's biological processes. In modern medicine, the moment of death is no longer solely defined by the stopping of the heart and lungs. With machines like ventilators and heart-lung bypass machines, we can keep the body's organs oxygenated and functioning long after the brain has ceased to work. This has led to the critical medical and legal concept of brain death. Brain death is not a coma or a persistent vegetative state. It is the complete and irreversible cessation of all brain function, including the brainstem, which controls essential life-sustaining activities like breathing. When a person is declared brain dead, they are legally and biologically dead, even if their heart is still beating with mechanical support. Determining brain death involves a series of rigorous clinical tests performed by multiple physicians. They check for any sign of consciousness or awareness, such as a response to pain. They test for brainstem reflexes, like the pupil's reaction to light, the gag reflex, and the eye's movement when the head is turned. The final and most definitive test is the apnea test, where the ventilator is temporarily disconnected to see if the rising carbon dioxide levels in the blood trigger any attempt to breathe on their own. If there is no response to any of these tests, and all other potential causes like drug overdose or hypothermia have been ruled out, a diagnosis of brain death is made. The concept of brain death is profoundly significant, both medically and ethically. It is the point at which physicians can cease life-sustaining treatment, as there is no hope of recovery. The brain's intricate structures have been so catastrophically damaged that the person, the consciousness, the personality, the collection of memories and experiences that made them who they were, is gone forever. It is also the necessary condition for organ donation from deceased donors. The ability to keep the body's organs alive for a short time after brain death has saved countless lives, allowing hearts, lungs, livers, and kidneys to be transplanted into patients who desperately need them. However, the idea of brain death can be incredibly difficult for families to accept. Seeing a loved one in a hospital bed with a warm body, a rising and falling chest, and a beating heart makes it hard to believe they are truly gone. This disconnect between the appearance of life and the reality of death highlights the complex relationship we have with our bodies and our consciousness. It forces us to confront the question of what truly constitutes a person. Is it the biological machine, or is it the mind that machine produces? For modern medicine, the answer is clear. When the brain is gone, the person is gone. While consciousness is a global phenomenon in the brain, it is not produced by every part equally. Specific systems seem to be critical for its creation and maintenance. One of the most important is the brainstem, particularly a network of neurons called the reticular activating system. This system acts as the gatekeeper of consciousness, regulating our cycles of sleep and wakefulness. When the brainstem is severely damaged, as in a catastrophic stroke or injury, a person will fall into a coma and consciousness will be lost, even if the higher parts of the brain, like the cortex, remain relatively intact. The lights are on, but nobody is home because the power switch has been broken. Moving up from the brainstem, the thalamus acts as a central hub or relay station. It receives nearly all sensory information from the body and directs it to the appropriate areas of the cerebral cortex for processing. But it does more than just relay signals. It helps to synchronize the activity between different cortical regions. This synchronization is thought to be crucial for binding together the different aspects of our perception, sight, sound, touch, into a single, unified conscious experience. Damage to the thalamus can lead to profound deficits in consciousness, fragmenting our perception of reality or plunging a person into a deep, unresponsive state. The star player in the generation of our rich, detailed conscious experience is the cerebral cortex, the wrinkled outer layer of the brain. Different regions of the cortex are specialized for different functions. The occipital lobe for vision, the temporal lobe for hearing and memory, the parietal lobe for spatial awareness, and the frontal lobe for planning and decision-making. Consciousness seems to emerge from the massive interconnected network of communication between these areas, particularly a network spanning the frontal and parietal lobes. When you become aware of something, these regions light up with synchronized activity, representing the global workspace where information is shared and integrated. When these systems are damaged, consciousness can be affected in strange and specific ways. Damage to the visual cortex can cause blindness, but damage to certain higher-level visual areas can result in a condition called blind sight, where a person can't consciously see an object, but can still guess its location or shape with above-chance accuracy. This suggests that their brain is still processing visual information unconsciously. Similarly, damage to the connections between the brain's two hemispheres can lead to split-brain patients, who can seem to have two separate streams of consciousness in one head. These cases demonstrate that our unified conscious experience is a fragile construction of specific brain networks. While the prevailing view in neuroscience is that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, some theories venture beyond the bounds of conventional biology. These ideas are more speculative, but they push us to think about the nature of reality in new ways. One of the most famous is the quantum mind hypothesis, proposed by figures like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. They suggest that consciousness doesn't arise from classical computation between neurons, but from quantum processes occurring within tiny protein structures inside neurons called microtubules. In this view, the brain acts as a quantum computer, and consciousness is a manifestation of these delicate quantum effects. This theory, known as orchestrated objective reduction, or ORCOR, is highly controversial and lacks direct experimental evidence. However, it opens a fascinating possibility. If consciousness is a quantum phenomenon, perhaps it is not strictly tied to the biological brain. It might be a fundamental property of the universe that the brain has simply evolved to tune into, much like a radio tunes into a broadcast signal. This would imply that when the brain dies, the information constituting consciousness is not destroyed, but could continue to exist in some form at the quantum level of space-time. It's a bold idea that bridges the gap between physics and metaphysics. Another philosophical perspective that has gained traction is panpsychism. Panpsychism is the view that consciousness is not a special property of complex brains, but is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of the physical world. In this view, everything, from an electron to a rock to a tree, has some rudimentary form of inner experience. What makes human consciousness so special is not its existence, but its incredible complexity. Our brains, according to panpsychism, don't create consciousness from scratch. They bind together countless tiny, simple points of consciousness into the rich, unified whole that we experience. Under this framework, consciousness doesn't disappear at death. It simply disintegrates back into its more basic constituents. Then there is the simulation hypothesis, which posits that our entire reality, including our conscious minds, is part of a sophisticated computer simulation created by a more advanced civilization. While it sounds like science fiction, some physicists and philosophers argue it's a statistically plausible scenario. If consciousness can be simulated, then our own minds might be nothing more than lines of code running on some vast cosmic hard drive. In this case, death would simply be the termination of our individual program. These ideas are on the far fringes of scientific thought, but they serve as powerful reminders of how little we truly know about the ultimate nature of consciousness and its place in the universe. The line between life and death, once thought to be sharp and absolute, is becoming increasingly blurry thanks to modern medical science. We now understand that death is a process that unfolds over time, and this creates a window of opportunity for intervention. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation and defibrillators are now commonplace tools that can restart the heart and restore blood flow to the brain, pulling people back from clinical death. But the frontiers of resuscitation are pushing even further, challenging our definitions of when someone is truly and irreversibly gone. We are learning that the brain is more resilient than we once believed. One of the most promising new frontiers is therapeutic hypothermia. This involves deliberately cooling the body of a patient immediately after cardiac arrest. Lowering the body's temperature slows down the brain's metabolism, reducing its need for oxygen. This buys precious time, protecting brain cells from the toxic cascade of chemical reactions that normally leads to irreversible damage after blood flow is cut off. This technique has been shown to significantly improve survival rates and neurological outcomes, allowing more people to not only survive cardiac arrest, but to return to their lives with their minds and memories intact. It's a powerful example of how manipulating a basic biological process can hold death at bay. Looking further ahead, scientists are exploring even more radical techniques for brain revival. Researchers have successfully restored some cellular functions in the brains of pigs several hours after they died. By pumping a specially designed solution of artificial blood and protective chemicals through the post-mortem brain, they were able to stop cell death, restore metabolic activity, and even observe some spontaneous synaptic activity, the basis of communication between neurons. While this is a very long way from restoring consciousness, it shatters the long-held belief that brain cell death is a rapid and irreversible process. It suggests a future where the window for resuscitation could be extended from minutes to hours. These advances raise profound ethical and philosophical questions. If we can pause the dying process or even partially revive a brain hours after death, what does this mean for our definition of being alive? How much brain function must be restored for us to say that a person has returned? Could we one day preserve a brain in a state between life and death, holding its structure in stasis until future technology allows for its complete revival? We are entering an era where our technological capabilities are outstripping our ethical frameworks. The quest to conquer death is forcing us to decide what, precisely, it is we are trying to save. As our journey through the science of consciousness and death comes to a close, we are left with a humbling realization. For all we have learned, the greatest mysteries remain. We have mapped the brain's networks, detailed the cascade of shutdown, and even peeked into the experiences of the dying, yet the central questions endure. We still do not have a conclusive, testable theory for how the brain's physical processes create subjective experience. The hard problem of consciousness remains as hard as ever. Why does the firing of neurons feel like the color red or the sound of a melody? This is the grand challenge for 21st century neuroscience. The nature of death itself remains a moving target. As our medical technology advances, the boundary between life and death will continue to shift. We may one day be able to revive brains that we currently consider irretrievably lost. This will force us to ask difficult questions about personal identity. If a brain is revived after a long period of inactivity, is the person who returns the same one who died? How much memory and personality must be retained for us to consider them the same individual? The science of revival is intertwined with the philosophy of selfhood, and we are only just beginning to explore this complex territory. The rise of artificial intelligence adds another layer to the puzzle. Could a machine ever be truly conscious? If we build a complex enough computer that perfectly simulates the human brain's architecture and processes, will it have an inner, subjective experience? According to theories like integrated information theory, it might, but how would we ever know for sure? A machine could be programmed to say it feels love or sees the color red, but we would have no way to verify if it is truly experiencing those things or simply running a sophisticated script. The question of machine consciousness may be the ultimate test of our understanding of what consciousness is. In the end, the quest to understand consciousness and death is a reflection of our own deep-seated need to find meaning in our existence. It is where the empirical rigor of science meets the spiritual and philosophical wonder that defines our humanity. We may never have all the answers. Some aspects of the mind and its ultimate fate may lie beyond the reach of our scientific instruments, but the pursuit itself is what matters. It expands our knowledge, challenges our assumptions, and deepens our appreciation for the fragile, beautiful, and profoundly mysterious gift of a conscious life. The great unknown still awaits, and it continues to call us forward.